At 76, Meryl Streep, the soul of American cinema, is quietly fading from the spotlight. Behind the awards and applause lies a life shaped by loss, sacrifice, and silent suffering. What happened to the world's greatest actress isn't scandalous. It's heartbreaking, and once you hear it, you'll never see her the same. A final breath in her arms. In 1978, as Hollywood was just beginning to whisper her name, Meryl Streep was holding on to something far more precious than fame: life itself. John Cazale, her partner, her love, her greatest companion, was dying of cancer. And not quietly. The illness was aggressive, unforgiving. He had been diagnosed while filming The Deer Hunter, a role he only kept because Meryl fought like hell for him. She begged the studio not to fire him. She threatened to walk if they did. She stayed by his side between takes, holding his hand, through every moment of exhaustion and pain. She filmed all day, then collapsed into the hospital chair by his bed every night. Her rising career was on the verge of explosion, but she was already burning with grief. "I didn't think about fame. I thought about John," she once whispered. "I thought about losing him. He was frail, thin, but his eyes still had that warmth, the same warmth Meryl had fallen in love with during Measure for Measure. He was 14 years older, a man of quiet genius, and she was just beginning." She said later that he believed in her before she believed in herself. Cazale died in March of that year, only 42. His final words to her? "You'll be okay." But she wasn't, not for a long time. His death shattered her. It didn't make headlines in the way a Hollywood tragedy usually does. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet, devastating. Meryl returned to work like a ghost, her grief woven into every word, every look, every role that came after. The vulnerability in her performances didn't come from talent. It came from loss. From Kramer versus Kramer to Sophie's Choice, critics raved about her emotional depth. But behind every tear, behind every shiver in her voice, was the same wound: John. "I didn't act sadness," she once said. "I remembered it." And in a way, she never truly stopped mourning. She just learned how to carry it with her. His memory never faded. She rarely spoke about him in interviews, not because he didn't matter, but because he mattered too much. Hollywood applauded the performances. The world adored her rise. But few knew the price of that early breakthrough. She didn't step into greatness. She was pushed there by grief. John's absence shaped her soul, and her soul shaped the history of film. A love that endured until it quietly ended. After losing John Cazale, Meryl Streep's heart was shattered, but not closed. Later that same year, she married sculptor Don Gummer, a gentle, deeply private man who helped her rebuild. Their love wasn't red carpet-driven. It was quiet, rooted in normalcy, far from the glitter and flash of Hollywood. And that's exactly what Meryl needed. They moved into a brownstone in New York, raised 4 children, planted trees, avoided headlines. In public, they were rarely seen together. In private, they were each other's home. For decades, their marriage was a mystery to fans, but not because of scandal. It was sacred. They protected what mattered most: their family, their peace. "Fame is a costume," Meryl once said. "Home is where I can take it off." But in 2023, the illusion of permanence shattered. Her publicist quietly revealed that Meryl and Don had been separated for 6 years. There was no announcement, no drama, just a simple sentence confirming the end of a 45-year love story, a fairy tale that had quietly unraveled behind closed doors, hidden beneath years of loyalty and silence. And still, Meryl wore her wedding ring. She never removed it for red carpets, never spoke ill of him, never entertained gossip. Because when Meryl Streep lets go, she does it the way she does everything, with grace and heartbreak. Insiders say there was no betrayal, no fight, just a slow, sorrowful drift. As her career soared and his world remained rooted in sculpture and solitude, they grew apart. The house grew quiet. The dinners became fewer, and eventually, they became two people who had loved well, but not forever. Some love stories don't end in flames, a close friend said. They end in silence. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not the break, but the quietness of it. After decades of giving herself to the world, Meryl's final chapter of romance ended without closure, without ceremony. She never gave interviews about the separation, never fed the tabloids. But those who know her say the pain was there, in her performances, in her eyes, in the way she spoke less and smiled less. She had already lost one love too soon. This one, she lost slowly. But even in heartbreak, she remained what she has always been: dignified, devoted, and deeply human. And now, as the world watches her age in real time, one thing becomes heartbreakingly clear. She spent a lifetime portraying powerful women, but behind the scenes, she's carried more sorrow than any script could hold. A body that has never known rest. Meryl Streep has spent the last 50 years giving her body to the craft, not metaphorically, but physically, in ways most audiences never fully realized. There were no long sabbaticals, no break from the cycle of transformation. Year after year, she vanished into women who lived lives far heavier than her own. Holocaust survivors, battered wives, grieving mothers, political warriors. And she didn't just portray them. She absorbed them into her muscles, her voice, her very bones. "I don't know how to half-play a role," she once said. "You either become the woman or you don't belong there." To prepare for the Iron Lady, she studied Margaret Thatcher's cadence until her voice shook from tension. For doubt, she altered her walk so severely it left her with joint pain that lingered for years. She trained in opera for Florence Foster Jenkins, screamed herself hoarse in August, Osage County, and lived in physical isolation to understand the stillness of the bridges of Madison County. These were not light touches, they were acts of surrender. Friends and co-stars have quietly said for years that Meryl often wrapped a film looking exhausted, haunted, and physically unwell. But she never spoke about it publicly, never complained, because for her, the pain meant she had touched something real. In her late 60s, signs began to show: chronic fatigue, muscle tremors, sleeplessness. Sometimes she forgot small things, names, moments, directions, but she brushed them off with a smile and a line. It's the price of memory work. And maybe it was. She once told an interviewer, "If I stop, I'll never come back." And so, she didn't. She kept working, even when the body begged for rest, even when her doctors urged her to slow down. Why? Because acting wasn't her job. It was her purpose. It was the one space where everything she'd lived through, grief, loss, motherhood, fear, could be poured into something meaningful. And when your purpose is bigger than your pain, you keep going. But now, at 76, her body is slowing. And for the first time in decades, Meryl may be forced to do what she's never allowed herself to do: stop. Hollywood's saint, now standing alone. Well, for decades, Meryl Streep was the name studios invoked when they wanted to make something important. She was Hollywood's gold standard, not just for acting, but for dignity. While others chased franchises, red carpets, or reinvention, she remained rooted in something deeper: craft, ethics, and empathy. She didn't sell skincare. She didn't chase youth. She didn't use Instagram. While others froze their faces in time, she aged in front of us, gracefully, defiantly, honestly. "I don't want to disappear behind perfection," she once said. "I want to be seen, exactly as I am." And for years, she was. She carried the industry's respect like a quiet crown. But with that crown came weight. As her male peers continued leading blockbusters into their 70s and 80s, Meryl found her offers slowly fading. Not because her talent dimmed, but because Hollywood fears aging women. She didn't complain, she didn't campaign, but insiders noticed. The calls slowed, the roles became smaller. Not worse, but less frequent. She had never relied on spectacle. She had always been the soul of a film. But today, in a landscape driven by algorithms and tentpoles, Meryl is being left behind by the very system she elevated. And that's the tragedy. Because she never sold out, never coasted. She stayed pure in a world that rewards the opposite. She never lowered her standards, one director said. And now the industry doesn't know what to do with her. At 76, Meryl stands alone, not bitter, not forgotten, but quietly distanced from a business that has shifted beneath her feet. She's still revered, still honored, but she's no longer needed the way she once was. And in that silence, you can hear something heartbreaking. The sound of a queen stepping away from a throne that never deserved her in the first place. When silence became a weapon. Meryl Streep was never known for tabloid drama. She built her reputation on grace, privacy, and unshakable empathy. But even the most respected woman in Hollywood couldn't escape the storm. When the Harvey Weinstein scandal broke wide open in 2017, the industry cracked. Decades of silence, secrets, and systemic abuse were finally being dragged into the light. Streep, like many, issued a statement. Clear, direct, damning. The disgraceful news about Harvey Weinstein has appalled those of us whose work he championed, she wrote. I did not know. I'm not deliberately silent. But it wasn't enough for everyone. Actress Rose McGowan, one of Weinstein's most outspoken accusers, went public, accusing Meryl of complicity. She claimed Streep had to have known that her silence wasn't innocence, but betrayal. Billboards appeared across Los Angeles. She knew. Her face, once a symbol of dignity, suddenly became a target. For Meryl, it was devastating. She wasn't just hurt, she was shaken. This wasn't criticism of a performance. This was a knife into her character. And for a woman who had built her life on telling the truth through fiction, the accusation that she had knowingly protected a predator cut deep. She responded, not with PR polish, but with fury. I didn't know. I don't collude. I'm sorry she sees me as an adversary. I'm not. But damage doesn't always need evidence. In the age of digital blame, perception becomes punishment. For the first time, Meryl Streep, the saint, the queen, the moral compass, was questioned. And that haunted her more than any headline. Not because she feared being canceled, but because she feared being misunderstood. She had always been a champion of women. Quietly, steadily. She mentored young actresses, negotiated for equal pay, funded female playwrights, and supported advocacy behind the scenes. But she never did it for press. She did it because it was right. And now, that quiet had become her enemy. "Sometimes silence is mistaken for apathy," she told a colleague, "but I just never wanted to make it about me." And that's where the tragedy lies. In a world that rewards shouting, Meryl chose restraint, dignity. But the moment demanded volume, and the world turned just slightly. She survived the backlash, of course she did. But something shifted. The glimmer in her voice dulled. The trust cracked. And for a woman who always gave us her most vulnerable selves on screen, it was clear. This wound was real, and it would never fully heal. A role that nearly broke her. In 1982, Sophie's Choice didn't just make Meryl Streep a star. It carved her name into cinematic history. But what it took from her, mentally, physically, spiritually, is something she rarely speaks about. Playing Sophie Zawistowski, a Polish Holocaust survivor, required more than emotional depth. It demanded complete surrender. Streep learned Polish and German fluently. She starved herself for weeks. She lived alone in silence to mimic Sophie's isolation. She slept little, smiled less. She became a woman who had lost everything, and it nearly broke her. "I lived inside her. Too long," she once confessed. "I couldn't get her out." Filming the infamous choice scene, where Sophie is forced to decide which of her children to save, left the crew in tears. It left Meryl shaking, sobbing, and unable to speak for hours. No one called cut. They just let her sit there, broken. After filming wrapped, the nightmares began. Friends say she'd wake up screaming. She couldn't eat, couldn't focus. She stayed up late pacing, reliving the scenes in her mind. Not as an actress, but as a woman who had touched real horror. Her family grew worried. They begged her to take lighter roles. "You give too much," one friend said. "They take too much of you." But Meryl didn't listen, couldn't listen. Her moral compass wouldn't let her turn away. "If I can speak for those who no longer can," she said, "I must." And she did, time and time again. Roles of grief, trauma, injustice, she carried the burdens of women history forgot. And in doing so, became a vessel for their pain. But there's a cost to that kind of devotion. Her body aged faster than her years. Her mind, brilliant as ever, grew heavy with sorrow. And every time she stepped into another woman's wounds, she left a little more of herself behind. Sophie's Choice won her the Oscar, cemented her as the greatest of her generation. But it came with scars no gold statue could heal. She never watched the film again. "I can't," she said once. "It hurts too much." And in that quiet confession lies the truth of her legacy. She didn't act pain, she carried it. The curtain between motherhood and spotlight. To the world, Meryl Streep was unstoppable, a goddess of cinema, always poised, always present. But behind the applause and acceptance speeches was a mother silently pulled in two directions. She raised 4 children while making over 70 films. That math alone is staggering. There were school plays and doctor's appointments, dance recitals and heartbreaks. And there were press tours, night shoots, costume fittings, award shows. The timelines didn't align, but somehow she kept both worlds spinning. She once said, "Motherhood doesn't pause for a role and acting doesn't pause for a fever." She built a life with her husband, Don Gummer, that prioritized privacy. No reality shows, no children on red carpets, no family brand. When asked why her kids weren't famous, She simply said, "They didn't choose this life. I did." And yet, even with that fierce protection, the guilt lingered. She was there, and she wasn't. She missed birthdays. She missed anniversaries. She'd fly home for one night, read bedtime stories, then board a plane before sunrise. Sometimes she showed up to award shows with red eyes, not from champagne, but from crying in the car because she'd just left a sick child behind. One of her daughters, now an actress herself, told a reporter, "My mom was always there, except when she wasn't." It wasn't said with resentment, just honesty, because Meryl never pretended to be perfect. She just tried. Friends say she'd call home from trailers in full costume just to check if the dog had eaten or if the math homework made sense. She wrote notes, sent lunchbox surprises, carved out rituals only her children would understand, so they'd remember she was trying to be present, even when she couldn't be physically there. And still, the industry rarely acknowledged the toll. Male actors were praised for being dedicated fathers if they mentioned their kids once in an interview. Meryl raised 4, worked non-stop, and carried the emotional labor of both home and Hollywood. Yet, the questions always circled, how do you balance it all? As if balance were even possible. She didn't complain. She simply kept showing up. With grace, with lines memorized, with guilt tucked neatly behind her eyes. And now, as she steps back from the spotlight, those sacrifices speak louder than any standing ovation. Because behind every performance we loved, there was a dinner missed, a bedtime story skipped, a child waiting for the front door to open. And still, she gave us everything. The screen got her fire, but her family got her heart. When Hollywood tried to box her in. For a time, Meryl Streep could do no wrong, but in Hollywood, even greatness comes with conditions. By the late 1980s, critics began to turn. They called her too perfect, accused her of being cold, too technical, too cerebral. Some said she wasn't relatable enough. Others whispered she was too serious. The irony? This criticism came at the peak of her power. She had mastered accents, devoured dialects, transformed her face, body, and soul into woman after woman. But instead of praise, she was punished for making it look effortless. The industry began boxing her in, offering her roles only in historical dramas, suffering mothers, noble wives. No comedy, no mess, no chaos, just slow-burning pain and award-season prestige. "They wanted me to suffer beautifully," she once joked, "but not to laugh too loudly." So, she rebelled. She took roles that made them uncomfortable. Death Becomes Her, a dark comedy that satirized vanity and aging. The River Wild, a rugged action film where she held a gun and outwitted criminals. Adaptation, where she played a drug-using, sex-starved journalist. And then came The Devil Wears Prada, a role that would redefine her career yet again. Miranda Priestley wasn't soft. She was brutal, ice-cold, brilliant, and still, you couldn't look away. Meryl turned what could have been a caricature into a portrait of a woman surviving power in a male-dominated world. And Hollywood? They loved her again. Suddenly, critics remembered why she mattered. She was called fearless, versatile, relevant again. But beneath the applause was the same question that haunted her for years. How long can she keep going? As if age were a deadline, as if her best work should be behind her. But Meryl never played by the rules. She didn't chase youth. She didn't freeze her face. She aged on screen and made aging look like an act of power. She once said, "If I disappear because I have wrinkles, then I never really existed in the first place. And still, the whispers returned. Fewer scripts, fewer calls. Not because she lost her edge, but because Hollywood lost its nerve. They didn't know how to market women who weren't chasing beauty or romance. They didn't know what to do with someone who could play anything, but refused to play the game. So they stopped calling. And Meryl, still brilliant, still vital, stood on the sidelines of an industry she helped build, quietly outshining everyone without needing the spotlight. Because even when Hollywood tried to contain her, she refused to fit. The public goodbye. That wasn't. In 2025, the announcement hit like a bolt of lightning. Meryl Streep would return as Miranda Priestley in The Devil Wears Prada 2. The internet exploded. Fans rejoiced. Headlines declared it a comeback. But for those closest to her, the excitement was laced with something else. Concern. On set, something was different. Crew members described her as quiet, distant, not in the way Meryl usually disappeared into roles, but in a way that felt disconnected. She moved slower. She often sat between takes, her hands shaking slightly. One assistant said she was found sitting alone in a dark corner backstage, her eyes closed, whispering lines to herself, not rehearsing, but re-grounding, trying to stay present. Filming stopped abruptly. No official reason, no press statement, but whispers spread like wildfire. Unconfirmed reports of a neurological condition, possibly early-stage Parkinson's. Some said it was fatigue. Others claimed memory issues. No one would speak on the record. And Meryl? She said nothing. Just one line, delivered quietly as she left set one evening. When it's time, you'll know. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. And still, the silence said everything. There was no grand farewell, no retirement post, no tearful press tour, just stillness, like a curtain falling without warning. For someone who had given her entire life to cinema, it was a strangely fitting exit. No spectacle, just a quiet step back. And maybe that's the most painful part, because fans never got a proper goodbye. There was no last scene, no final bow, no assurance that the greatest actress of her generation was stepping down on her own terms, just a paused production, an unanswered question, a legend disappearing into the fog. And as the news cycle moved on, one truth lingered. She may have already given us her final performance. We just didn't realize it at the time. The legacy that cannot die. Meryl Streep has 3 Oscars, 21 nominations. She's won more acting awards than any woman in film history. But numbers were never the point. Her true legacy lives in the lives she changed, not just the characters she played. She made vulnerability powerful. She turned quiet suffering into strength. She portrayed women not as ideals, but as complicated, bruised, brilliant humans. She taught an entire generation of actors that technique is nothing without truth, that the best acting doesn't show, it disappears. Barack Obama once said, "Meryl has turned empathy into an art form." He wasn't wrong. She didn't just play people, she honored them. And it's not just the roles we remember, it's what she stood for. She never sold herself, never chased fame, never settled. She stayed fiercely principled in an industry that rewards compromise. And because of that, she was more than an actress. She was the soul of cinema. Even now, as she steps further from the spotlight, her presence lingers in every performance that dares to feel too deeply, every actress who dares to age naturally, every film that values honesty over spectacle. She taught us that grief can be graceful, that strength can be soft, that beauty is fleeting, but integrity lasts. She didn't need to say goodbye, because her work already said it all. And when she's gone, truly gone, we won't just mourn the artist, we'll mourn the standard, the conscience, the quiet force that made us feel seen, because they don't make them like her anymore. And they never will again. She gave everything, her body, her voice, her heart, to stories that weren't hers, but became unforgettable because of her. Now, as the lights dim, Hollywood is left hollow. This isn't just the end of an era. It's the quiet exit of a woman who made us feel and never asked for anything back.